Carter, Chris and I are here for the Florida Squeeze. A couple things I want to report. I want to report that WestJet, Canadian airline, has cut its capacity to its two primary Florida destinations, Fort Lauderdale and Orlando. They're cutting their capacity effective the last weekend of March. So we're going to see where we used to have double daily flights, maybe single daily or a couple flights a week from Toronto and Calgary. In fact, I think Fort Lauderdale, Calgary is going to be down to weekend only service in the winter. WestJet no longer serves Miami, and Fort Myers and Tampa, most of the flights are seasonal anyway to those two airports. Vancouver, Fort Lauderdale will be gone completely during the summer, and Toronto, Pearson Airport to Orlando is being reduced from 17 flights a week to about 8, which it was supposed to be 17 flights a week in the summer. It's being reduced to 8. So that tells you kind of the shortfall in demand. Airroutes, which is a go-to site for route development, and I patron that site a lot. I suggested airroutes.com. They are reporting that Air Canada is going to down-gauge their flights, their daily flights from Montreal and Toronto to Fort Lauderdale. They're going to replace the A321, which is a high-capacity airplane, seats about between 190 and 200 passengers or more, depending on the configuration, with an A319, which seats about 50 to 60 less passengers. So you're going from, I think Air Canada's, especially with Rouge, their leisure airline division, their A321 seat about 220 passengers. So I think we're going to go from 220 to about 150 on those routes. They are slashing flights to Fort Myers, Orlando, and Miami as well. Airroutes reports they'll be cutting frequencies like WestJet has, as I mentioned. Tampa at this point seems relatively unaffected, although they have fewer flights than Orlando and Fort Lauderdale. Miami has fewer flights than all of them. So any effect on Miami might wipe out most Canadian flights or most Canadian passengers who go to Miami. So down gauging, not cutting frequencies yet, but down gauging the aircraft, taking about 70 seats a day. And, if you calculate that, for a full week, that's about 500 seats less a week. Air Canada will be offering between both Toronto and Montreal and Fort Lauderdale, so about 1,000 less seats a week. That's pretty dramatic. That's starting in 2 weekends, apparently, just like the WestJet changes. So I want to mention that the legislature has not discussed the issue of Canada and Florida-Canada relations, and I kind of get this. When I worked exclusively in politics or government-related stuff before 2006. That was my entire professional resume until 2006, early 2007. I did not realize, I knew snowbirds came to Florida, right? That was the extent of my knowledge. You'd see Quebec plates in Central Florida or South Florida or Ontario plates. But I did not realize how intertwined our economies were, how many Canadians own businesses here, how many Canadians have invested in properties here, how many Canadians come every year. Last year was 2.5 million. Canada has only about 30 million people. So that's about 7.5% of the population. Obviously, some people come twice, but let's just say roughly 5 to 7.5% of the population come to Florida every year. And there's lots of investment. There's lots of money that goes back and forth. A lot of the retail industry here in Florida, hospitality industry and retail industry, dependent on people from Canada coming. And what I understand from talking to as many Canadians as I do, and doing as much work with Canadians as I do. Because like I said, starting in 2008 onward, and I've said this in previous videos, I've had so much more of a relationship with Canada and an understanding of Canadians and the Canadian impact on Florida. It's not the tariffs for everybody. For a lot of people, it's the tariffs. It's going to be more expensive to come here. Maybe it'll be cheaper to go to Mexico. Maybe it'll be cheaper to go to the Caribbean. But for a lot of people, it's just, hey, this is now a country. You guys are threatening our sovereignty. It's the rhetoric. It's the 51st state stuff. It's the dehumanizing or delegitimizing of our nationalism and our national pride. So we don't want to spend any money in the United States. So that's an even bigger thing than the tariffs. And something I didn't quite realize 2 weeks ago, and I now realize, and I think it's just going to get worse and worse, quite frankly. So we'll keep you updated on this at the Florida Squeeze.